Yes, well, I've got COVID, and Coral's got COVID. I think she's got the milder form that girls can get, and I've got that much more severe, much more hard to deal with COVID that boys can get. Well, my throat's actually probably a bit sorer than Coral's, but anyway, we'll be fine. So I'm just going to pray and we're going to get into this. Lord, I thank you for this morning. I thank you for what you want to do this morning through this time together. And I just pray that you'll help me share what I believe you put on my heart to share. Well, one guy was about 18 years of age and his mate was about 17. And the first thing that the 18-year-old said to me was, "What do you think? Should we ask him?" And he's sort of talking to his mate. He's talking to me, and his mate, he just starts nodding, and I'm nodding, yeah, ask me. And so this is what he asked me. He said, "Well, see my young mate here, he's got a girlfriend, he's planning to go out with her this weekend, and he's going to have sex with her for the first time. What do you think? Should he do it? Should he do it with this girl?" And I was taken by surprise. I thought, how does God get me into a conversation like this? It was a Saturday, and all day I had one plan to do that I had to get done, which was buy some whiteboard markers from Big W in Narellan in Sydney. And so 9 in the morning, I'm trying to get this done. It was 4:30 in the afternoon. I get to Big W, I find the texter aisle. As I turn into it, these two guys are standing there right in front of the texter aisle. They work for Big W. And I thought they were talking about whether they wanted my opinion on the texters, but no. It was this conversation about my mate's a virgin and he's about to have sex with his girlfriend, and what do you think? And I can remember just taken a little bit by surprise, but I just said, wow, sex changes everything. And 15, 20 minutes later, I walked out of Big W, had my texters, and yet I got into a conversation that, how did that happen? And it was a God setup. It was one of those moments where God put together, he got me into a conversation that he wanted me to be part of. Friday week ago, Steve Pike was just going to Bunnings, and he had no plans of anything other than just go to Bunnings and get some stuff. And he bumped into a guy there that works in Bunnings, and he just started talking, and somehow in that conversation it came up about Red Gum, and the guy was thinking of coming, and Steve encouraged him, and that little conversation was the catalyst for that person and his family being at Red Gum last week. It's a God setup. Those little moments in time where God puts everything together. It just seems random, but I love these moments. And I've been calling them God setups for a long time because only God can do it. Only God can put it together. And it's like our ordinary life intersects the purposes and the divine will of God, and it all comes together, and you feel so inspired afterwards and encouraged that God was in this moment in your life. And David in the Old Testament, he wrote about this, and he talked about it in Psalm 37 verse 23, and I'm going to read it to you. "The steps of a man or a woman are established by the Lord, and he delights in their way." Only this week, as I started to dig into this, did I discover that the Hebrew word that gets translated established, or in the King James says ordered, also means set up. I was really surprised that way back when David wrote this, he was calling these same things God setups, like I've been doing it, I never knew it. And he described these setups as happening in these little baby steps, these little moments in our life when it all comes together. And he talks about the steps are ordered and they are our way. Our way is our life's course. These steps happen in our life's course and they bring delight. Now, the Hebrew language has only 8,700 words in it. The English language has over 500,000 individual words in this English language, which helps to explain why that there are many different translations in the English of the Bible. And they've been made over up to 500 years now. And it's why the one Hebrew word you'll find in different translations will mean different things or say different things. And you'll find a variation in all our translations. Now, I want to read to you this verse in a Hebrew context, in a direct translation from the Hebrew way of speaking. The King James, when it was first translated in 1611, it put in an extra word. It put in the word good in front of man. The New Living Translation puts in the word godly. But God does not put such requirements upon his setups. To experience God's setups, God doesn't put that requirement. So here's the Hebrew text. I'm going to read it to you. From Yahweh, the steps of a man are established, and in his way he delights. And the words he and his have a little H in front of it. It's not talking about God delighting in our way. It's we delight. We have fun when we step into the moments that God puts together. Wherever you go, whatever you do, in the normal part of your life, there are moments that only God can set up. They have divine purpose. And they leave you shaking your head thinking, how did God put that together? And it's inspiring, and it's encouraging, and it is a delight. When we first shifted back to Bairnsdale, I was really desperate to catch up with Ellie. I knew something of what had happened in her life and what she would be going through, but I hadn't had any contact with her for maybe, 6 years. I don't know, it was a long time. But I had this plan. I wanted to catch up with Ellie. And there was a day that I had a meeting in Bairnsdale. It took 3.25 hours, this meeting I had with this person. And it could have gone for 2.5 hours, would have made no difference. But at the end of the 3.25 hours, I had one plan, and that was to get to Aldi to buy one little tiny thing and get home. As I pulled up in front of Aldi, I saw Ellie walk into Aldi's. So I quickly parked my ute and I sort of got in really quickly. I just went past her and then turned around and said, do you remember me? And she just looked at me and she just burst into tears. And she hugged me. And we talked in the middle of the aisle. And people were going around us and for half an hour we stood there and talked. And just near the end of the conversation, Kerry Pike walked past. And it was just a moment, it was 30 seconds. And I introduced Ellie to Kerry and Kerry to Ellie. And it was the first time I've ever seen Ellie, first time I've ever seen Kerry down the street when I've been shopping, and I've never seen them since. But in that moment, Ellie could see the kindness, the softness in Kerry's heart. And that really encouraged her. And from that one meeting, Cora and I caught up with Ellie a number of times since. Sorry I'm sounding all nosily, but this head's blocked up with everything, right? But we caught up with Ellie, and that eventually led to her and Paul being part of Redgum and what God's doing in her life. And I just love these moments, these setups that God orchestrates, and we just fall into them. And David wasn't the only writer of the Old Testament to sort of describe and put a theology around what we experience. Solomon wrote this in Proverbs 16 and verse 9. And in the New King James he says, a man's heart plans his ways, but the Lord directs his steps. Guess what? That word directs comes from the same Hebrew word that's translated ordered or established in Psalms, and it's the same word that means setups. See, you may plan to go shopping, and plans are good. We need plans in our life. You may plan to go to the Speedway. You may plan to go to a social event. But God loves to step into our plans and do something that's supernaturally set up by Him. You may live in Melbourne and you think, oh, I'd love to go camping up the bush. And you go up the bush one weekend and you meet these random people and you form a friendship with them. And eventually that leads you to sell up everything you have down at Somerville and move to Bairnsdale and be part of Red Gum because you want to be part of this community of what God's doing. And that's a story of Steve and Heather and the kids. It was a God set up they accidentally tripped into but changed the direction of their life. Wherever you go, whatever you do, God has setups for you to step into. But setups aren't always convenient. They can be moments we can miss those moments. And you might have to be home for tea. You might be in a hurry. Jesus, one day, he wasn't in a hurry. He was just tired, like worn out, physically tired. And the rest of his team, his disciples, had gone into this little village to get some takeaway. And Jesus said, look, get me a Big Mac meal and I want a Diet Coke. And he ordered what he wanted, but he stayed behind just because he was tired. And he's alone, and he's sitting near this well in Samaria, and he's waiting for the boys to return with his lunch. And Jesus had no clue that a single unmarried woman would turn up at the well. Jesus didn't know that he would end up talking to her about her failed love life, that he would communicate with her in a way and tell her about her life supernaturally, that she would go back to her people and bring them to Jesus, and he would talk to them, and that many in this Samaritan village would get saved. And on that day, Jesus didn't know that he was about to step into a God setup. He didn't know that for the next 2 days, instead of moving on, they would stay around that village and minister to all the needs of the people in the village. That these people were a marginalised group, that they were non-Jews and the Jews despised them, and yet Jesus and the disciples would be ministering to them. Jesus also didn't know that after he returned to heaven, when the early church was scattered, Philip, his disciple there, that got into the little village that day, would come back to this area. And when all the Christians were scattered, Philip would live and stay and be welcomed and accepted by the people as a result of this little divine setup that God had put together. And the reason I know that Jesus had no clue is because John telling the story would have loved to have told us that Jesus stayed behind because he knew what was going to happen, but he didn't. John is honest, and he tells us that Jesus stayed because he was tired. He was worn out from the long walk they'd already done. And God's setups aren't just about some random person that you bump into and you help them. Throughout your whole life, God wants to use very specific moments to direct you and guide you into all he has for you. Setups that can move you from what is to what could be. And often we don't know how important they are, how significant they are till afterwards. When we shifted to Sydney, I wanted to live in Bairnsdale all my life. I know that wherever we've been in our life, we've lived in the bullseye of God's will. But I wanted to be here forever. But when a new pastor came to Bairnsdale, he made it clear that I wasn't able to continue in any ministry in the church here. And that was very discouraging. But I was still part of Youth Alive on the state team, and we put in this big event at Rod Laver Arena. We had 15,000 young people there, and I was on stage that night in the middle of Rod Laver Arena, and it was a big high in my youth ministry days. And coming home that night, I got a phone call to say that I could no longer be part of the Youth Alive team because I was no longer a youth pastor because my position was taken from me. And I was very discouraged. And the next morning I wanted to ring up one of the state executive guys in the ACC in Victoria and just have a go at anybody, have a go at him. I was really ticked off and I felt like I had nothing left. But I got a phone call from Sydney inviting us to go to Sydney and head up some large high school ministries up there. And when we went to investigate it, before we got there, the state president of the ACC in New South Wales, he oversaw this group of churches we're part of, and he says to the guy that invited me, well, I don't know who Lex is, you tell me he's your mate, and he's a good guy, but I don't know who he is. So he decided to ring up the state president in Victoria, but he was overseas. And so he rang one of the guys on the state executive. He rang the guy that I was going to ring and have a go at. And I would have blown the whole thing apart. But this guy said to the state president of New South Wales, oh, Lex is a great guy. And Lex will do well. He's good with youth and all sorts of stuff. And I nearly blew the moment that God had for us as a family to shift to Sydney and ultimately come back. And when we were coming back, it was this same guy that put in a good word for me 16 years earlier that supported Redgum being established, because having another ACC church in town at the time, 3 years ago, was not appreciated by the person that headed up the other ACC church, and they were fighting against us. And this guy in the Victorian State team, he supported us, and we are here today as a church, an ACC church, because I didn't blow a moment that I nearly did, but I didn't understand how significant that moment was. And Jesus, he initiated that day the conversation with this woman at the well, but he didn't do it to minister to her, to help her. He did it because he was thirsty. And what starts in the natural ends in the supernatural when it comes to these God setups, these moments, but you don't know. It just starts in the natural, then suddenly you realise, whoa, God's in this. And that day, Jesus very quickly moved from the natural to ministering to this lady, to helping this lady, to speaking into her life. But the moments, you can miss them so easily. And when we had our church in Sydney, I arrived one morning, and as I was getting to the building, I turned a really sharp corner. And just as I'm walking and I'm focused on trying to get into the building, I'm running a bit late, and a guy with long hair down about his waist comes around the corner towards me, and as we sort of almost collided on the corner, I didn't say hello. Like, there was a moment when I could have, and then I was past him and it was too late. And I'm walking into the building, I'm thinking, oh, I wish I'd said g'day, because I like to be friendly. I like people. And I missed the moment. And then about 10 minutes later, this guy, I'd never seen him before, he came back into the building. And he was coming to Open House Church. That was his first morning. And I missed an opportunity to say g'day first. And I'd ignored him almost. And he became Josh. He became a real key part of our team. He ran the sound and helped with youth, and he's a great guy. But there was a moment I missed, and I was upset with myself. And what happens when we miss the moments that God has for us? It's an opportunity to get it right next time. And so in the weeks that came after that, if I was walking down the street from our house and someone's coming towards me, I'd always say g'day first. And I thought, I'm not going to miss a moment like that. Well, I was driving home one day and I saw this Asian girl walking along with long hair right down to her waist. And as I drove past her, I thought, wow, there's not a lot of Asian people in our little community around here. I noticed her. That was it. But then about a week later, I'm sitting in our house. It's a hot day. I'm just in a pair of shorts. I look out the window and here's this same Asian girl walking past the front of our house. And I something in me sort of leapt up. I wanted to jump up out of my chair and go and say good day to her. And I thought, she'll think I'm an idiot. I'm some strange old bloke. And anyway, I didn't. But it had a real impact on me seeing her twice. And so that Sunday, where we live was about 10 minutes walk from where we were meeting as a church. And instead of driving, I decided to walk. And as I'm getting nearer the church, there's a T intersection. And ahead of me at the T intersection, I see the same Asian girl walking past at the end of the T intersection. I'm a couple of 100 metres away, and she's straight past the T intersection. And I get up to the T intersection, I turn right, and I'm following her now. And I'm sort of walking as fast as I can, but I know unless I run, I won't catch up to her. She's about 20, 22, I suppose. Anyway, I just kept walking at normal pace. And as we got near the church building, she stopped and turned around and started walking back towards me. And my heart's beating fast. I'm thinking, what's going on here? And just as she gets next near me, it's a little footpath, I said, look, excuse me, I'm not weird, but I've noticed you 3 times now, and I just want to say hello. I passed this church just in the building there, and I just want to say hello to you. And she said to me, well, I'm a Chinese student. I'm about to go back to China, but she said, I'm a Christian. She says, wow. And I said, well, would you like to come to our church? And she said, I'd love to. And so the next week she came, and we prayed over her, and then she went back to China. That's it. I don't know anything more of the story. But I was learning to be obedient and not miss the moments. Now, not all moments are as very specific as that, you know. They aren't as dramatic as that, but they do have impact, and God knows why he's setting them up. Now, don't miss this. The qualifications required to experience God's setups, you don't need anything particular. Just being a human being is enough. See, David wrote that the steps of a man, and that Hebrew word literally means a common old everyday garden variety person, just any person. When Solomon wrote it, he made it so inclusive because the word that he used for man means mankind. It's all of us. All mankind plans its ways, but all of us are open, able to receive God's setups in our life. We all qualify. And in Romans chapter 9, verse 20, Paul is quoting God, and he says this, I was found by those who did not seek me. I revealed myself to those who did not ask for me. That's one of the ways God does setups in our life. Even when we're not seeking him, we have no interest in him. He comes looking to find us, and he uses little setups, moments in time. And I've told the story before, but it's worth, I think, retelling. I was coming back from Singapore. I'd been in Singapore for 3 days on a business thing that we'd set up over there, and I was coming back and I was tired. and I didn't want to talk to anyone. It was a night flight. I just wanted to sit on the plane, find a couple of spare seats and go to sleep. Instead, the plane's jam-packed with people, and I'm sitting next to this big guy who's got a beard, like looking a little bit like a terrorist because he's from Afghanistan. I didn't want to say anything to him, and I just sat down, and somehow he looked at me and I looked at him, and I said, "G'day." And he said hello, and we started talking. And I found out that he was an atheist, that he'd grown up he was a first generation from Afghanistan, but he was from a Catholic family. And he was very, very anti-God. And he was just flying back from Germany. He was like a scientist when it comes to computers and stuff, very educated man. And we just started talking about God stuff. And for 7 hours, I answered questions that he asked me, but not in an argumentative way, not with theology, but with stories. And I just told him stories. I told stories of Jeff's first wife, Leonie, and how we as a church loved on her when she died and all the things that happened. And I just shared life stories, God moments, God setups. At the end of our flight, I was energized. I was tired when I got on the plane, but when I got off, I'm pumped. And I wanted to give him something that he could take with him for the rest of, I'd never see him again. So I offered to give him this book that I was reading. It was a guide book, and he said, "No, I don't want your book, thanks." And we left. And later on, I was down at the toilets and getting the train out to Campbelltown, and I bumped into him again. And he came over to me and he said, "Oh, look, I just want to say the reason that I didn't take your book," because he said, "Your book won't change me. The only thing that will change me is bumping into other Christians that will tell me God stories like you've told me." I don't know. There's just a moment in time. I don't know the end of the story. I don't know his life. I don't know who he's going to bump into, but God does, because God put us together on that plane, on that flight, so that what unfolded, and he wasn't searching, but God was. And he does it for all mankind. He loves the whole world. For God so loved the whole world. And so you don't have to qualify just by being human. God wants to do setups in your life, in your everyday life. He wants to change you from what is to what could be through these moments in time. Imagine if we just said yes to the next thing that the Holy Spirit puts on our heart to do, to respond to act into. God knows. He knows. He really knows. This is the last of our Village Life series. I think it's number 25 in the series, and this is our last one. We're a week away from Christmas. And I want you to do something with me. I've got this idea that we would take the contacts in our phone, we'd go to the contacts, and we would pray over them. And in your phone, you've got people that you may speak to regularly, occasionally, people you haven't spoken to in years. And I want you to pray over this list of contacts in your phone, and then ask God to show you who to send a little message to. Not a generic thing that you send to everyone. Make it personal to one person. And it could be a Christmas message, a little encouragement. Just say, "We're thinking of you, praying for you, care about you. We haven't spoken for a long time, but haven't forgotten you." Anything. And so I'm going to pray right now, and God would use these as divine setups, that in your phone are human beings, individuals that need God's encouragement. They need your encouragement. What a great present to give someone this Christmas. I'm just going to pray, Lord, you know the needs of everyone in each of our phones. Long lists, some of our contact lists are very long. But Father, as we pray over them, I pray that you would guide and direct who to send a personal message to this Christmas, to say hello to encourage in some way. That this would be an act of village life, would be an act of stepping into a God setup that you have for us, a divine moment that would bring encouragement to someone very personally. See, divine moments are really important. I'm standing in the bird aviary of the shearing shed. We built this bird room in this part of the shearing shed. And a fire took over. I talked about it a couple of weeks ago. And the fire got into all this stuff here, up into the roof, through this wall here. And we were probably 30 seconds away from the whole thing, burning the whole shearing shed down. It was a divine moment when Mandy turned up and Coral turned up, and the three of us at the same exact moment realised the shed was on fire. No hose, no tap, but we had a fish pond outside. We bucketed water and got the thing out. It was too late to call a fire brigade. It would have been all gone. But it was God's perfect timing. But I wasn't praying in the middle of it for God to help. It was too dramatic, too flat out trying to put the thing out. Only afterwards did I realise how much the hand of God had protected us. God's setups are really important. God's in our life because he wants to be. Don't miss them. He wants to turn from what is to what could be. Go for it, okay? We'll see you. Next week, no, nothing on, except I will do a short Christmas message online, just short, say good day, and then we're back on New Year's Day, short service then too. See ya.